Again, good morning and welcome. Thanks again for coming out here today for this press conference. This is an important message that we want to convey and get out to the community, really highlighting some more success that we're having within our cold case unit, the unit that we launched back in 2019, having a clear understanding that we had about 350 cold cases that needed the attention of a dedicated investigative group that can really start hammering away. And I think many of you have been in the room over the last year or so where some of the success we had was to resolve and bring to justice closing out cases on a serial killer, an individual who had stuffed individuals inside of suitcases and left them on the streets of our community. And today we get a chance to talk about another success that we've had as an organization within the cold case, which quite personally where we've been able to track down and identify some of the most egregious of type of criminal behavior and criminal. Anyone who preys as a sexual predator on our community, in my opinion, is part of the worst of society. Anytime sexual crimes occur in our community, it violates individuals' rights, and it's not just a matter of dominating an individual's body, but it creates psychological scars that last a lifetime for many of the victims. And one of the cases that we bring into the attention of the community is what occurred in the 1980s. In 1984, we had an individual who was out in the community conducting serial rapes. He was targeting women during their times where they're in their homes, preparing for bed, putting their kids to sleep, etc., and decided that he would break into their homes, use a pillowcase to mask and cover himself up, and assault these women and rape them. And so, over the last year, I have to give much credit to one of our sergeants who's here today, Sergeant Cammy Floyd, who's been with the organization for well over 9 years, has been assigned into the cold case unit, and had recognized by reading a simple article that there was an individual out here who had committed these crimes in the 80s, and that there was a potential to have some form of evidence within our facility or within our organization. And she began immediately to analyze, and this is very impressive, over 500 boxes consisting of thousands and thousands of investigations to narrow down and try to figure out what could she match, what could she find. And the success of that has resulted in us having probable cause, establishing warrants for an individual named Robert Kohler, who is suspected of committing these atrocities. Not only suspected, but we were able to gain his DNA, confirm that DNA. That individual is currently in the care and custody of the Miami-Dade Police Department down south, our neighbors there, as they also have made an arrest related to criminal elements that they've seen and been able to gain probable cause in terms of rapes that occurred down there. So one of the things that I want to tell this community is that we are committed to continue to keep this cold case unit operational. We are committed to expanding it because there is no expiration on justice. And this community deserves to have justice, whether it's 10, 20, or 30 years down the road, and we'll continue to pursue these cases and these criminals who are still at large. With that, I have to take a moment and like to turn this over to our case manager, who really put this thing together, Sergeant Cammy Floyd, and she'll be able to give you some highlights about how the case was evolved, and then maybe we'll take a few questions from you all. So, Sergeant.
Okay. Back in the 80s, Robert Kohler committed anywhere between 40 to 45 sexual batteries throughout Miami-Dade and Broward County. Robert Kohler had the same MO on all of his cases. He knew the women would break into their apartment sometime in the middle of the night or the early morning hours. He would have a sharp instrument, threaten them not to scream, not to say anything. He would sexually batter them and choose an item from within the residence to secure them before he left, either hands or hands and feet, and then he would steal items from within their house, most of the time money from their purse. In 2019, I started a sexual battery initiative to ensure that all of our sexual battery cases were looked at and re-examined, and all of our sexual assault kits were tested. During this time, I discovered a newspaper article about the pillowcase rapist, and I started trying to identify some of these cases that matched this MO for this particular individual. But we did not know who he was. In 2020, Miami-Dade successfully made an arrest and identified Robert Kohler as a suspect in the pillowcase rapist cases. From there, I was able to obtain his DNA, and we were able to match that DNA to multiple victims in Broward County. And we successfully have cases in the system. And when he's finished in Miami-Dade, he'll be extradited here to Broward County to be tried for these 6 cases. We're hoping that victims that may not have been identified at this time will come forward and call our Crime Stoppers tip line so that we can have their names and a little bit more information and possibly find their cases and be able to prosecute those cases as well.
Sergeant, can you just spell your name for us, please?
Sure, it's Kamifloyd. Any questions?
Sergeant, tell us about the frustration and the joy of success, of progress when you work a case like this.
Time was the most frustrating part, digging through the cases and not finding anything that matched. It was difficult to locate some of the records because everything is not computerized. So digging through the files and finding the correct dates was difficult. And once you identified boxes that matched those dates, reading every single case file to try to find that MO that matched the pillowcase rapist, where he would cover his face or the victim's face, sharp instruments, stealing items, so on and so forth, was frustrating. When I found my first case, it actually saddened me to have to reach out to that victim and have her relive what had happened to her so many years ago. Many of the victims didn't even tell their family members what had happened to them. So there was a time delay in them deciding whether they wanted to prosecute. They had to tell their families what they had gone through back in the 1980s and discuss it with them before they would even discuss it with me. So it was heartbreaking, but when they did decide to come back and they were brave enough to discuss it with me and pursue the charges, it made me proud of them. I can't believe what they went through, and every single one of them were just amazing in their abilities to speak about it and pursue these charges.
Can you clarify how many cases he maybe linked to? You mentioned 40 to 45 in the 80s, but then you said 6. Is that in total, Miami-Dade and Broward?
So Broward County currently has 6 that we have active cases out for. There are more that are, all of them are still active. Miami-Dade has several that right now they have only arrested for 1. So we do have active cases. We believe, based on what the task force had investigated back in the 90s, that there are 40 to 45. Unfortunately, due to technology, it's difficult to identify who those victims are. And that's why we're having this press conference, hoping that victims that have reported it back in the 80s, maybe even the 90s, will come forward and give us some help in locating their cases.
For those that may be watching that are potential victims of this man, what would your message be to them who may have felt that, maybe this guy got away with this?
He hasn't gotten away with it. He's in handcuffs, and we're hoping to keep him there. But those who haven't come forward yet, I can tell you that this will give you some closure. If you're brave enough to talk about it again, it's something that you can now finally say, yes, this happened to me, but it's in the past. It's done, it's over, it's closed, and you can move forward with your life, never again wondering, I wonder who that was and what he's doing today.
Can you talk about what Coler's been doing all this time? I mean, has he been in and out of jail? Or?
I don't have much information on that at this time, but he was arrested, several traffic infractions. He was arrested in 1991 for sexual battery in Palm Beach County, and is labeled as a sexual offender due to that crime.
Where was he living when these crimes occurred?
I don't have all those details at this time.
What's been the reaction from the victims that have come forward, and now you have the success from the task force? How are they feeling? Of course, in closure, what are they feeling?
Every victim that we've been in touch with for Broward County has felt relief. They're all very happy that he's been arrested, and several of them have commented, I hope more women come forward. They're hoping that everyone can feel closure the way they have. And it was a rough road for them. We have some wonderful victim advocates who have assisted along the way, given some counseling and needs that the victims might have. So at this point, I think that most of the victims want to be heard, and they want more victims to come forward.
Take us back to 2019. Why did you decide to focus on this type of crime and reopen these cases?
I was assigned to this Special Victims Unit at that time, and mainly did special projects for that unit. We were aware of many sexual assault kits that needed to be re-examined due to new technology. Back in the 80s, they only had blood typing. We weren't able to identify full DNA. So knowing that, it was a good opportunity to go back and look at some of these capital felonies and try to prosecute them.
You mentioned that he knew a lot of the victims. Was that through work, or were they neighbors? How did he know them?
So one particular victim mentioned that he already knew her name, which is why I had said that, and commented, "I know you." I'm not certain whether he watched them for some time and got to know who they were, but none of the victims knew who this man was. He was a stranger to every single one of them, but he knew all the victims were similar. A lot of them would go to bed at the same time. He knew their layout of their homes, and it seemed that he picked his victims very carefully.
Now, if there's any other victims out there, how would they go about coming forward?
Call our Crime Stoppers number, 954-493-TIPS, and once you give your information, we'll have a detective contact you.
But because they never came forward at the time, so for identification, they'd have to have kind of, would it be facial identification that they think it's him?
I believe we have a lot of victims who did come forward. We're having a difficult time locating those cases, and with them calling us, it'll give us more information to locate those cases. With a name, with a time frame, location, it'll help us identify those cases, and we can retest that evidence and hopefully have another case.
So is there any DNA evidence from those cases you're saying that could be tested?
We do. All the 6 cases here, we had this evidence. We still had the files. We still had evidence in our evidence department that we were able to go back and review.
I mean the other cases, the people you say that reported it, was there DNA taken at that time on these other cases?
I couldn't tell you that unless I knew which cases they were.
Yeah, 1 second. Excuse me. Thanks. Thank you, Sarge. One of the things that's very important for the community to understand is twofold. One, that there was success in this cold case unit to apprehend an individual who has been skating the law since 1984. The advancements in technologies from DNA and other different methods that we use in criminal investigations have expanded beyond what was available in the 80s. And so for anyone who may have been a victim, speculates that this may be a suspect that engaged in raping them or breaking into their home and sexually assaulting them, we want to hear back from you. We have the resources here. We're expanding this unit. We're dedicating more personnel to cold case so that we can start getting closure out there to people who have uncertainty and may even still be living in a point of fear in their life. Let's keep in mind that this type of atrocity does not disappear overnight. And these victims, and Sergeant Floyd attests to it, having spent a lot of intimate time and talking to these individuals, are reliving or continue to live the fear as to whether or not this individual is still out there. And so for some of the victims today, the answer is he is out there, but he's in custody and he's going to serve justice. So we appreciate you all coming in today. We hope that this message gets out to the community. And again, outstanding job by Sergeant Floyd and her crew, and we look forward to continue to keep this unit alive. Thank you.